Hello, fabulous friends, fans, and superstars. Welcome to Synchronicity Web TV. I am your host, Nadiya Shah, and this is your moment of synchronicity. Well, I'm so excited to celebrate with you once again one of the brightest stars in our field today. The one and only Gemini Brett is here, and we are going to talk all kinds of things like sacred geometry and the astrology, the incredible astrology of February 2026, and so much more. And Brett is back at Synchronicity University, actually teaching sacred geometry this March 2026 over at, as I said, synchronicityuniversity.com. And you've got a little time left to choose your tuition rate. It is the only place on the planet where you get to learn from Gemini at this low a rate as part of our mission of making the most brilliant astrologers accessible as part of incredible astrological education. And Gemini exemplifies, embodies all of it. Gemini, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's so good to see you. And we're in this seriously Aquarius time, right? Like the most maybe since 1962. And those times, of course, link as they all do. So I'm really excited to bring my orbit back to synchronicity again and to have an opportunity to share some of the mystery teachings.
I personally am so excited about this. And I know that we've got a lot to cover just in our conversation here today. But I would love for you to touch on, how do you define sacred geometry? Why does it matter?
I think I'll offer the long answer to why does it matter. The first question, I'm not sure I can even answer. Some geometers I love have a hard time with it being called sacred. But I believe when we do anything with intention, especially for the intention of feeling, healing, and knowing and growing, it's absolutely sacred. And I also prefer that term because it helps us separate this work of seeds of life and the like from some of the nightmares folks have when they have memory lane to geometry class in high school or whatever it was, where you're just dealing with these proofs and why should I do any of this, right? But so let me start with that second question first, why does it matter? I think my first teacher, who's Daniel Gemario, often says this whisper from the ancient ways, which is that astrology is the highest of the lower sciences. And it's what? Right? And I love that. There's just the questions that come to life as soon as you hear that. Is that true? And what does it mean? Daniel often likes to ponder about, well, if astrology is the highest of the lower sciences, then what are the higher sciences, right? And so love, maybe synchronicity, right? Or maybe that lives somewhere in the astrological realms, right? But I've come and it was really stumbling into the necessity of becoming a student of sacred geometry myself, and I'll share a little bit about that journey. I've come to the Quadrivium, which are the four sacred sciences, as I like to describe them, are the sacred arts of the old curriculum for the mystic. And so while I'm not exactly sure what's above astrology, maybe some of the things that we're utilizing this beautiful cosmic craft for, right? Or peace, or hope, or faith, or navigating the storm from a spiritual level, or, peering through the veil to observe the mysteries of incarnation, manifestation, and the like, right? It's hard to say, but we can answer the question of well, what's below astrology? So first of all, what is astrology? And I feel that we often, when we use this term astrology these days, we might actually be describing one side of a rainbow bridge that astrology is. And that side would be correspondences, which I like to call the immeasurable qualities of the heavenly happenings. And on the other side of the bridge of this great art, astrology, lives the measurable quantity of the heavens, and that's astronomy, right? So this is my great love and my great devotion to help astrologers remember that, yes, while most importantly, the chart is a map of the soul, and astrology is this symbolic language, that astrology is not a symbolic language alone. It is the poetic breath of nature, that when we re-nature our astrology by reconnecting to the mysteries of the living sky, we will remember the roots of the rules, the proofs of the equations that we use. That the beautiful thing about this craft, in respect to some of the other divinatory arts, is that we have nature, we have these moving planets and their cycles according to their own, geometries and harmonies. And as we connect to the chart, not only as a map of the soul, but as a map of time, right? From a particular space, and literally the sky, right? And the moving stars, the planets, right? Through the fixed stars and the constellations and the signs and the houses above the ground and below. And like when we put our feet back on the ground and embody the astrological by experiencing in a sacred way the astronomical, right? We're really kind of connecting to that other side of this bridge. And we have quantity and quality. And a metaphor I always love to share in there is from another one of our sister sciences, harmony, which is, I differentiate noise and sound in this way. So there's the ancient riddle, right, of if a tree falls in the woods and nobody's there to hear it, does it make a sound? I say no. I say it makes a noise. It makes all sorts of noises, crackles and pops and all sorts of creaks and things, But that noise becomes sound through the experience of it. So whether this needs human ears, I'm not saying that, but if nobody's there to hear it, then it's just noise. It's, waving the medium, and we can measure frequencies and amplitudes and all sorts of the science, measurable quantity stuff. But, how a song moves you versus how it moves me, that's about you, and it's about me, and where we come from, and when we came up, and all those things might help us understand something about the kind of music that's likely to dance Nadiya versus the kind of music that's likely to dance Brett. Or I could grab the saxophone over here and play something, and some of you would come in and some of you would run away because you are you, right? And so for me, that's that kind of qualitative, even immeasurable part of musical harmony, right? We have the measurable frequencies, amplitudes, all that stuff, harmonic series. I can go on and on about the music, but the immeasurable piece, right? You and I go see this amazing concert, and it will bring us together because we're dancing together. It's amazing music. But afterwards, as we're trying to compare notes, we might even experience how different we are, or the impossibility of even, speaking these mysteries. It was fun, and that saxophone solo or whatever, you know what I mean? And for me, that's like an apt metaphor for astronomy and correspondences. There's this measurable thing on December 21st, 2020. If you're into that whole Gregorian trip, I went and saw Jupiter and Saturn aligned above Cathedral Rock in Sedona, Arizona, and it was most magical and amazing. And I took a photograph or 7, and I saw it, and they were close, and there's, I could put a ruler to it, right? It's this measurable thing. And we can look at it in a reference plane and say, hey, that was the first degree of Aquarius, and these air sign conjunctions, and we could go on and on and on in our beautiful art, right? But how is that going to dance you versus how does that dance me, right? Then this requires the great gift of astrology, right? So we can take that measurable thing and understand more of how that noise becomes sound. Because it was opposite my Saturn and square my Sun. I might expect through our great craft that that's going to show how that energy is going to dance me, right? But of course, it aligns to Nadiya's chart in a different way than it does yours and yours and yours. We're all individual people experiencing these global and heavenly happenings, right? All right. So astronomy as this kind of other side of correspondences, with astrology being the thing between the measurable and the immeasurable. That helps us understand what's below astrology. Because in the tradition of the Quadrivium of the four sacred sciences, astronomy herself was described as number in time and space. And we see this in our astrology, right? Of course, timings are so key. I'm reflecting now on like 12 years ago when I really started sweeping the compass and becoming a geometer as well as an astrologer. And many of us will look at 12 years and wonder about Jupiter with a great cycle of annual profections, or right? There's lots of things that we can do because ours is a study of time and wheels within wheels. And it's also a study of space. Obviously, we're tracking these moving planets through constellations and signs in space. And right, and in relationship with one another and in geometries with one another. So beneath this, in this diamond of the quadrivium, beneath number in time and space, which is the astronomy, we have number in space. And that was said to be geometry. And again, I prefer the term sacred as geometry to just differentiate from that thing that we had in high school or before or after. That can be kind of a nightmare, right? Like the way that geometry is taught these days, it's all about quantity. And I'll come back to that. So number in space, geometry, or sacred geometry, just as I like to say, sacred astronomy, right? Like there's a way to go out and experience Jupiter and Saturn, which is like, cool, look at those gas giant lights up there. And there's a way to go open ourselves and listen and invite, right? There's like a sacred way of doing anything, with intention. And this is the Nadiya way. So number in space, geometry, number in time is harmony, right? So musical harmony, right? Which is one of the ancient sacred sciences as well. And I'm one of many who's very interested in mapping the 12 signs of the zodiac to the 12 keys that we utilize, at least in Western harmony, all the way back to Pythagoras and probably before. We actually see it in like tuning tablets from the Babylonians and the like, right? There's something really important about 12ness. And I'll get back to that because that's another reason of why we should be with the geometry. I'd say learn the geometry, but it's a little bit different than that. All right. So anyway, we have number in time and space, astronomy, number in space, geometry, number in time, harmony, and then number itself, right? And by the way, in the tradition, that was called arithmetic. But that word really doesn't work for me because that sounds like 1 + 1 is 2 and, 3 - 2 is 1. And that's all good. Like we should learn our quantity in these sciences and the measurable as well, right? And 1 duck and 2 ducks is 3 ducks, and I'm fine with that, right? They'll also tell you, however, that 5 ducks minus 6 ducks is -1 duck. You're like, well, how are you going to have -1 duck, right? Or even 0 ducks. Is 0 a number, right? These, like, we don't get to like trip on number in our study. What if before we were taught that 1 + 1 = 2, we were encouraged to contemplate oneness, right? And the truth is, as I experiment with the kids, we might not be ready for that. We were probably only there before we learned speech and that, and then we're meant to be kind of away from the mystery for a while and then come back to it, I think. But so at some point in our lives, we want to come back to that opportunity to contemplate the quality of number. What is oneness? What is two-ness? And in astrology, as astrologers, sometimes not so consciously, but we have the opportunity to experience two-ness by exploring an opposition, right? Which, by the way, we used to call the diameter. We used to call the trine the triangle. We used to call sextiles hexagons. We used to call squares squares, right? Like it was geometry. And of course, that geometrical part of our craft is so significant. Aspect theory. But as it is too often with the curriculum of our culture, it's kind of like we just learn this thing and we take it on faith, right? So an opposition is a hard aspect, they say. I prefer to say activating. You're probably like me in that regard, I bet, Nadiya. You know, we can look to the Thema Mundi and see why in the tradition the opposition is associated with Saturn. And we can explore that, and the trine with Jupiter, and we can explore that, you know? But when you start sweeping circles with a compass and looking at how circles relate and create the opposition, it's no longer just us reading about what an opposition is, applying that, see that it works, that's great, you know? But we're now in the experience of creating it. So one more thing I'll say before I close my mouth and open my ears is if the star student these days was first required to study these sciences below, I don't mean lesser than when I say that, but I mean like if astronomy is number in time and space, then harmony, geometry, and number itself are its building blocks. It is composed of these, right? And so we climb this ladder, right? Like if we were students of the harmony as a requirement before they start teaching you the astrology, and this is how it was, or of the geometry, there'd be none of this 13 sign stuff. All right. Like, because creation creates in 12s. And that's a code that I was told at the launch pad, which is what I call the drawing pad. Okay. So let me say one more thing about that. And when geometry kind of first came to me, I was, Nadiya and I, before we hit record, I was sharing about how my shoulder is really bothering me right now, right? So I'm practicing authenticity. So how are you doing isn't a greeting. And I might first respond with, are you really asking? Right? Because we don't have long enough. But it was like, oh, I'm suffering. I'm having this whole shoulder thing. And I was reflecting on how there was a time in my life, and it was 12 years ago, when I was really first starting to draw geometry. And I remember how I was trying to train myself not to just like lay my left arm on the table as I was drawing and like furthering this kind of injury that I had at that time. And now there's been this like reawakening, recycling of it. And of course, as an astrologer, I'm looking at these cycles and trying to explore more of what the kind of frequency of common synchronicity has to say, you know, about my incarnation and the like, of course, right? But I'm thinking back at a time when I was really deeply involved with many healers, and I was becoming an astrologer. Astrology came to me in 2012, and this was 2013 into 2014. And I was really deeply in the study of Venus cycles at the time and learning about the 5-petaled rose that I imagine most of you here have seen, or the 5-pointed star that Venus and the sun together draw an Earth zodiac over the course of 8 Earth years, which is 13 Venus years, and these 5 kisses and this whole thing, right? So I'm at a weekend, let's say, healing meditation. And there's this beautiful temple on this ground. And it's this regular hexagon. In fact, this is from that temple. And I was like, oh, I wish that was a pentagon. I wish that was 5-pointed. I wish that was astrological, right? So that night I meet the medicine and was in deep healing. And then there was a long period of light, which is like, dude, this is the most astrological shape possible. This is the zodiac. And it's time that you graduate from watching sacred geometry videos on YouTube and reading about this or that in some esoteric book and get a compass in your hand, kid. And I listened. And I came across later this interesting statement. It's kind of a heavy statement, but they say when you put the compass in your hand, you become God. It's like, whoa. Some people don't want to hear that. Maybe use a different name. I often like to say the one, and I'll speak much about that in this course, the difference between the one and one the, as I like to say. But the reason why I found later, and maybe in my first trance, is because now we are studying creation through the act of creating. So you're not just looking at something from the outside, right? You are inside. You are the creator. So I sat down to draw the flower of life, which everybody knows, and you have to draw 51 circles to do this thing. And if you haven't swept a compass before, and by the way, you won't be required to in this class, and I'll even show you an app that you could do this on a tablet or a phone if you don't want to take the time to get a compass and get to the launch pad yourself, although I really cannot highly enough encourage you have an actual kind of yoga, like a sacred work, a practice around creating geometry so you can be in that kind of space of creator as we study creation. So I set out to draw the flower of life, and the first circle was kind of a bulky process, and that's as far as I got. And then I have no idea where I went, but I came back from this trance, and I had at my kitchen table, my old place in Seattle, I had drawn this circle, and then I drooled into the center of the circle in my trance of wherever the heck I went, right? And so I made this symbol that we use for the sun now, the circumpunct, with my drool dot in the center of this circle. And for the first time in my life, I circled. I had experienced this amazing thing. And I knew now why, as I had learned several times before, we call the circle spirit. So I don't know, 3 or 4 times before this and some after, I had been shared, it had been shared to me by astrology teachers or books that these glyphs that we use in our day and age to depict the planets are created from these 3 shapes, right? The circle of spirit, and the crescent of soul, and the cross of matter. And then they always turn the page. And I'm like, wait, what? Let's talk about that. That's what I'm in this stuff for. What is spirit? What is soul? Why is a crescent soul? What do you mean, right? And there's always just no comment. And for me, being with the smile of the moon, that beautiful crescent moon reflecting sunlight to earthly eyes, that's one way where I get to explore the crescent of soul. But it's really at the launch pad. It's really in the sister science or this high art of sacred geometry where I learned that a crescent is actually 2 circles. After drawing, guilty of drawing just thousands of terrible crescents in my day and age when I'm drawing notes for a client, or I've drawn a lot of bad crescents. Once I learned this, it's oh, but then wait a second, but a crescent is made from 2 circles? Wait, what is that? But so what does that mean about soul? And then you just have these opportunities for contemplation, right? And just as a particular song, a sequence of noises will dance you in a different way than it will dance me. What you receive at your launch pad when you explore the circle of spirit or the crescent of soul is going to come to you in your language. And that's the language that counts. So I'll share some of like what I've experienced, what I've learned, but more importantly, this is one of the great devotions I have that's aligned with sharing keys of the mysteries that are going to, I am sure, allow you to further crack open your windows into the beyond, right? And I can't open that window for you. It is your window. But I can, as it has been in the tradition for millennia and probably more, offer you these keys in the sacred geometry more than anything else, and its practices are powerful keys to open portals, to see a world behind the world that you and I know is there, even though we were trained rigidly to know it does not exist.
Wow. I love how you connected the sacred geometry to the actual shapes of the glyphs of the planets. It shows us how rooted in astrology we find sacred geometry. I was thinking also as you were talking about aspects, right? You alluded to them as well, or I think you specifically mentioned them. You didn't just allude to them, that the square is part of sacred geometry, and we use that in astrology. And understanding the nature of the square itself helps us to understand that aspect, helps us to become a better astrologer in the process, if that is our intention. You know, whatever our intention might be. For some, it is going to be connecting whatever's happening with sacred geometry to astrology. However, for others, it's going to be in and of itself, right? Just for the sake of understanding the sacred symbols that geometry seeks to integrate or help us to understand that much more fully. It is a journey of its own as well. But I love how integrated it is to astrology. But I know that sacred geometry is also very connected to numbers as well. And I know, like, they say numerology is rooted in sacred geometry as well. Can you talk about that for a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just first mention, the two tools of the geometer are the compass, right, which creates curves that, as we will deeply experience in this course, are themselves beautiful, mysterious, and immeasurable, right? And the rule, which makes lines, right, which are measurable. Now, if I asked you, Nadiya, to like draw a square for me, you might get one of these things, a ruler with these convenient lines, and you might say 20 centimeters by 20 centimeters,
Thank you for
right?
honoring the fact that I'm Canadian, but yes, okay.
Yeah. And I mean, or from anywhere else.
Yeah, yeah.
But, like even there, how do you make that 90-degree angle? And no. In the two tools of the geometer, the compass and the rule, not like the ruler like we learned in school, it's this. There's any straight edge. Like you don't get lines, right? Like, I mean, you don't get measurement lines, you get lines. So how, with a compass and a rule alone, do I create a square? And that's one of the many, many things you'll experience and create in this course, along with trines and grand sextiles and the 12-spoked wheel of the zodiac. It took me a while the other day to convince myself the best way to start this course would be at the end and then go to the beginning and get back to the end. I was like, you know what? Like in lesson 1, where instead, like most of my students will be like, okay, draw 108 circles. And they don't intersect, and just ask, what is a circle? Why a circle, spirit? And it's deep, but it's also like, it's a whole thing, right? So now we're going to start with the seed of life and see how this beautiful expression of the goddess, which we see drawn and probably pronounced in different names all over the world, many cultures throughout space and time, because it's what circles do, is itself the breath of the universe, which we'll get back to in course 5, but it is how creation creates, and it does this in 3, 7, 12, and it is how we birth the zodiac. So even just in the first lesson of this course, you will learn to draw the 12-spoked wheel. And it will really help you understand deeply why the zodiac consists of 12 signs. So many share that this is just some like arbitrary thing, right? But if it was, why wouldn't we do like tens? I mean, you and I were taught in school that we have a base 10 numbering system because the human design has these 10 digits. Some use their toes and did 20. You can see 12 in the hand, by the way, if you use your thumb as the counter. You get Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces in your finger pads. And you get 4 3s and 3 4s. Do that over here, and you get 2 6s and 6 2s. And you can work the moon and do all sorts of amazing things in this sacred design called your body. But yeah, as we experience like the route of it, and the steps like necessary, not only like, okay, do this, then do that, then do this. It's like, as I do this, the 1 becoming 2, the as above, so below, I'm not going to skip to the 3rd thing without being in deep contemplation of this and of the womb, the vesica, that these 2 circles create. We will find that the earth is born through there. And as geometry teaches, all things are born in the vesica piscis. So we will find the trines and the squares here. But as we go further into the seed of life, we will definitely like experience from the inside why 12, which math calls the first abundant number, is 2 6s and 6 2s and 3 4s and 4 3s. And we'll have an opportunity to explore polarity, triplicity, quadruplicity, or, you know, some say like the genders, the elements, the modalities, in our own tongue, in our own language, in the language of the birds, in the language that can't be heard, that can only be experienced, right? And these things, I feel like they really come to life through our explorations of astrology because we see that it works. We see that when the moon squares the sun and has that weird straight line in the face of such a curvy being, whether waxing or waning, that thing's just like kind of unnatural, but it's the most natural thing there is. But it creates like a tension, you know, which is what we teach about squares. But why tension? And harmony reminds us that we intentionally create tension for the sake of sacred release, right? So this is a way of exploring number itself that's different than numerology, as it's called these days, which tends to come through a base 10 exploration. You know, and there's cool images there, but I tend to find that the way that the launch pad and these sister sciences of astronomy and therefore astrology of correspondences teach the numbers, which is very much in a system of 12ness, aren't necessarily in agreement with the 9 number approach of, you know, what some these days call Chaldean or Pythagorean numerology, or like the sacred 13 count in the Mayan tradition or other traditions of, you know, modern day Mesoamerica, etc. And it really is just inherent. It is the very fabric of the zodiac, which I've become convinced is something beneath our feet that looks like this, a hexagonal crystal core. And we'll get to that after we explore the great hexagon and Saturn and much more in this course. So the numbers and the geometry are inherently related. Again, remember, like number itself, number in time, number in space. You know, another way I really like to explore this is square and trine. and now I can have an embodied experience of that. Now I can do this like when the moon is square the sun, I can go point an arm to the moon and point an arm to the sun. I can feel that 90-degree, that square shape in my body. I can open up my body as the moon waxes and her smile grows, and we get to that trine shape, and I can feel how the trine is much less tense than the square. Like you can actually have a physical experience of this, and it helps you know and ground into the truth that this stuff is real and it's earthly, right? And the harmony, the music, the geometry, especially when we're not just like watching these things, but doing these things, right? So like I teach astronomy, right? And like, so here's a video I'll share from my backyard, but go to yours, be in the temple. Do you know what I mean? And again, like all of these crafts, they're ways to get into the temple of great mystery.
It's so wonderful to just be here witnessing you, because I'll tell you, you make my job so easy. That's what I really like, is that I can just sort of sit back, get out of the way, because you know what you're doing. You are such a pro. And I know lots of people are really going to get so much out of this 5-week course. So, once again, everybody, Gemini Brett is coming to Synchronicity University this March 2026 with a 5-part course on sacred geometry. You can see he knows his stuff. You can see that he will take you on a journey that is ultimately a journey of spirit and sky and so much more. So I know I'm really looking forward to that. I do want to be sure, though, before we wrap up, look, and thankfully we do have some time here. I would love to ask you about the astrology of February. We are now in February 2026. Here we are. 2026, huge year. And I know this month, huge month. I would love to know your thoughts on, well, let's start with the fact that literally, as this is publishing, as we are talking, we are literally days away from Saturn moving into Aries and meeting Neptune at 0 degrees of Aries, a huge astrological event. The last time these two planets met in this type of very rare configuration, I read somewhere that it was like 9,000 years ago. Like that's how rare
At
this
the Aries
phenomenon
point.
is. Sorry, at
Mhm.
the Aries point is
Right. Because they
amazing,
meet
right?
every 36
Yes.
years-ish, so 1989 in Capricorn. But here at this point of the zodiac, that is so important because that's an astronomical thing. The Pisces Aries cusp of the tropical zodiac, of Earth's zodiac, and let me just share that again. Not a sidereal star-based zodiac, not of a constellational zodiac, but of Earth's zodiac, the directional zodiac. It is due east of the center of the Earth, and therefore works like a global ascendant. It's not east of Toronto or of Mexico City or of Berkeley, California, right? Those are different because we're on the surface. But from the center of the Earth, which is where we measure the placement of the planets and the signs from, that place where we are all one, right? There is a north, that's Earth's North Pole, and it leans eternally towards 0 Cancer, and the South Pole towards 0 Capricorn, right? So the moon going to Capricorn is just the moon getting here, right? And the other cardinal directions of our planet, of Mother Earth, of Gaia, due east and due west, they are aligned to 0 Aries and 0 Libra of the tropical zodiac, right? So when we have planets connecting at this place that's east of our planet in space, this place that therefore acts like a global ascendant, they really do speak of beginnings, right? So this great cycle, right? Of cycles within cycles within cycles within cycles of Saturn and Neptune coming together at this point. Like it's a mind-blowing thing. Yet I'm intrigued by it. And as you know, of course, Nadiya, it's happening, 5 days after the first eclipse of this calendar year, if you're into the whole Gregorian trip. We're in this time of just extreme Aquarius. This is just changing as you and I are recording this. Mercury's moving from Aquarius to Pisces. But we've had this an Aquarius party going on, right? And there's a solar eclipse in Aquarius in 1962, where many astrologers back then, that was before I was born in this body, were speaking of, is this the dawning of the age of Aquarius? Because it's the most Aquarius chart like ever. Go check it out. But 62, that's 64 years ago. And 64, twice 32, 32 years is a Sun, Venus, Mars cycle, right? So it's just as we have Sun and Venus and Mars in tropical Aquarius now, that was happening then, and other beings were involved then too, right? So wheels within wheels, cycles within cycles, what was going on then, how can that come through now? Some of that we would love to see. Can we have a revolution again? And, that revolution of love in the 60s, what if, But yeah, as I contemplate Saturn and Neptune, one thing I'll say in our world is one of my prayers for this is bridges being built between astrologers who identify as modern and astrologers who identify as traditional. Because Nadiya, and you've been at this longer than I have, like you've seen this great schism somehow develop in astrology, right? And it's become like pronounced. And then I think maybe like a little bit less so. But it's like you're either like a modern psychological astrologer or you're a traditional like predictive astrologer. And, which of these things are you? Now, if we had to identify one as Neptune and one as Saturn, we'd probably go modern psychological, kind of dreamy, archetypal Neptune, and more traditional and rule-based and maybe even fatalistic, or even karmic Saturn, And of course, many of the other planets want to get in on that conversation, right? But still, if I look at this through the lens of their connections, well, the last time they came together was in 1989 in Capricorn, which is a sign of eldership, of foundations, the very kind of like rocks that we build the temple upon, and the framework and the rules of the game. And we can go on and on and on. The Council of Elders, the Circle of Grandmothers, Capricorn. And it was around that time when many of the translation projects began, like James Holden's work, the work of the three Roberts at Project Hindsight. That was like 1993, right? Where a bunch of these texts that had been sitting around were now starting to be translated. And because so many of the ancient texts were like, how do you say this? Euphemistically, efficiently burned at the stake, right? They had to translate this language into that language into that language to get to the thing, right? and so much of like the forgotten astrology, at least of the so-called Western tradition, was kind of coming back online. Now, I don't want to in any way say that there haven't been, quote unquote, traditional astrologers or people more aligned to like the ancient practice, like all the way through. But this is when things became really popular and the Hellenistic astrology started coming back, right? And obviously Hellenistic astrology is very interesting. I'm sure you've tripped on this too. It's like the younger the astrologer, the more interested they are in the old stuff. It's like, how does that work? And I started on like a very modern, though different path of astrology at the sacred or Shamanic Astrology Mystery School was the first school that I studied at with Daniel Gemario and Kaylin Castell. But then I found myself like really intrigued by the ancient work, especially since I find that like the embodied astronomical practice is really in it, because that was how they got to experience a chart. So anyway, it's said that when we look at cycles between two planets, and let's just speak about the moon and the sun. That's one that we get to explore, experience every month that we know so well. That the slower moving planet will, I don't like the word, but so let me not say it because the word is dominate. But let's
read it. Say it. Yeah,
right. Let's say the slower moving planet will have more strength or voice for the first half of the cycle. right? So in the moon-sun cycle, and it's good grammar, by the way, to speak the name of the faster-moving planet first, right? We know we get a new moon, and then moon comes out of the flames. And in the sunset west, we see Diana's bow. We see the sliver smile. It's like as she's grinning and celebrating her monthly survival of the fire trial, right? And then she waxes and grows in light. And that's one of the reasons why the waxing moon from new moon to full moon is said to be the solar side of the cycle. But another reason why is because the sun rises before the moon, when the moon is waxing. Now, after we come into fullness, when the full moon rises at sunset and sets at sunrise, in the waning weeks or the waning fortnight of the lunation of the moon-sun cycle, now the moon's rising before the sun. And so this is said to be more of the lunar time, which we also get to experience in the shrinking, the decaying of the moon's light as she approaches the sun again for their next meeting, right? So if we now project that onto Saturn and Neptune, of course, Saturn is the faster moving planet with 29 and a half years to get around. And for Neptune, 165, right? It's a slow moving thing. So Saturn's going to Neptune's moving, Saturn's going to cruise all the way around. So it's like a different structure than the moon and sun. But if we look at like the first about 18 years of the Saturn-Neptune cycle, Neptune, the slower moving planet, will rise first. Okay, so in the last 18 years, we've been in kind of the Saturn voice of their dance. And now we're coming into more of the Neptune voice of their dance. Now, I said 8 hours ago at the beginning of this interview that astrology is so much more than some symbolic language alone. Astrology is the poetic breath of nature. And this means no matter the attempts of patriarchy, church, whatever you want to call it, astrology would not go away. And I actually find personally that it was a great gift that when, at least in the Western side of the tradition, to use that term, we were disconnected from the root. She had to be dreamed anew. And there's actually a great gift in this, right? So if you read about Scorpio from Vedius Valens or Ptolemy or other folks from the Hellenistic era, you're going to get, it's the nocturnal sign of Mars. And I love the astronomy right there, right? The nocturnal sign. And it's cold and wet, and maybe talking about stars of the Scorpion constellation. And like, you're not going to get much. You ask an astrologer in 1975 what astrology is, you're going to get a book of this amazing archetypal sorceress and, the passion and the sexuality and the aliveness and excitement, like all these wonderful things, And it's like, that's one, I would suggest, of the gifts of the disconnect from our roots, is because it required the mystic to dream astrology anew. And now we have this opportunity to connect these new songs to the ancient code. But this isn't something that's meant to do through exclusion, and you choose this or you choose that, right? The renaissance of astrology, that is the opportunity of our times. And this meeting of Saturn and Neptune at the cease point is a very significant contributing factor to this. We have the opportunity to bring in astrology that is informed by both the ancient tradition, and the stargazing tradition is the most ancient there is, and the timekeeping tradition, right? With this new archetypal, psychological, dare I say, maybe more compassionate. I shouldn't say more spiritual, because as we kind of get into the ancient papyri, we see a very deep spirituality in the ancient astrology, which I think a lot of modern astrologers don't know about. But soon there won't be traditional or modern astrologers. There will be astrologers again. That's my prayer for our community in regards to the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, and that in the first kind of half of their great dance, in the first 18 years-ish of the cycle, it's going to be more dream-based. I'll have students who like, I don't know, like I open their chart and I just saw this and I know I'm supposed to start with. I was like, that's what you start with, right? It's a sacred geometry. It's a mandala. It's a portal that's here to help inspire the practitioner's intuitive gift. And so the thing that jumps off the chart at you, which is going to be different than the thing that jumps off at me, probably is something you should trust as a vehicle that you can use through like the rivers of your compassion to connect and help this person that you have the honor of sitting with help themselves heal and feel and know and grow, even if that person's you and you're looking at your own chart, right? And so I believe that we're going to have the opportunity for a reinvigoration of knowing that compassion, empathy, intuition is part of the astrological process, and that was no stranger to the mystics of the ancient ways at all. And yet there will be more opportunity to keep that grounded in the sacred ancient traditions. And again, for me, and geometry is part of this. The harmony is part of this. The number study and gnosis and experience and conversation is part of this. The astronomy is a huge part of this. Because when we have an embodied, renatured experience of our astrology, we understand why Capricorn is the drumbeat of the ancients. We understand why Cancer is the science of water, by meaning we water things to help them grow and we nurture them. We understand that this isn't just something that somebody said, and therefore it is. And if enough people believe, then it works. There's something in that too, though, right? But we understand why Cancer and the moon are besties. There's reality in this, not just some arbitrary program. And one thing that you will certainly know when you come explore the beautiful shapes and sounds of sacred number by drawing circles and lines at your launch pad with me in this Sacred Geometry for Astrologers course at Synchronicity University is this natural experience of 12ness. So to quote from the Rig Veda, one of the oldest scriptures, if not the oldest scripture that we're aware of, the 12-spoked wheel of order rolls around and around the heavens and never ages. Right? And again, to say something that I just kind of whispered in before, this 13 zodiac thing wouldn't have happened if the astrologers of our day and age swept the compass first. And so you will be one of those. And I really look forward to being able to share this language and get to hear what you're finding in your explorations of these portals together. And I just want to celebrate, Nadiya. You and I spoke about, well, maybe we should wait until March 14th, right? 3/14. Some of you will write that 14/3 because you understand that days are shorter than months, okay? But 3/14 is Pi Day, right? This great transcendental number pi. But no, 3/7, because one thing that you're going to explore in this course as well is how 3 and the Trinity creates 7, the planets creates 12, the signs. So even our launch date is itself numerologically designed.
Well, as everyone can see, it is so obvious why it is that Gemini Brett is one of the brightest stars in astrology today. He's absolutely brilliant. And as Gemini just said, he's returning to Synchronicity University, this time teaching sacred geometry as part of a 5-week course. As this is publishing, you've got a little time left to choose your tuition rate, as low as just $5 a class, an unheard of rate to learn from the one and only Gemini Brett. Gemini, thank you so much. I'm so looking forward to your class, but also to just sit here and listen to you is incredible for a few reasons. One is because you're brilliant. Another is you make my job so, so easy. And another is I can just sit back and take it in. And when we speak, I come away with a greater reverence for what it is that we do. And I think that that really is the foundation to a strong astrology, like collectively, but also for us individually as practitioners of astrology. And I just thank you so much for all of that. You are making this incredible and truly unique and outstanding contribution to our field. How wonderful to witness it in this time and space with you. So thank you.
Thank you. And Synchronicity University is the right place for me to be sharing sacred geometry for astrologers. So thanks for that. I'm reflecting, first of all, received and reflected. This is how I experience you as well, Nadiya. And there wasn't enough of that today. The moon's in Libra as we're recording, but I've been more in the Aries space. So pardon me. I would love to say one more thing about Saturn and Neptune that folks can maybe take away. And I'd love to hear how this resonates with you too, Nadiya. We're moving from a period of time where if you had a Neptune transit, let's say to your sun or moon, Venus, whatever it may be. Well, let me say like the Saturn-Neptune conjunction is between an Aquarius solar eclipse and a Virgo total lunar eclipse. And that Aquarius solar eclipse, by the way, is in my 10th house. So what an honor to be able to share this information here. And the lunar eclipse will be aligned with my Venus. So what a wonderful opportunity to share the Virgo Venus sacred arts. That's part of my attraction to this material that we can see in the code of my nativity, I believe. But so years ago, I had Neptune in Pisces opposing my Venus, which is when a bunch of this stuff came in. And then in more recent times, Saturn opposed my Venus, right? And it was like that for many of us. For some of you, you're like, what are you talking about? My apologies. For others, you're like, yeah, I had that one and those ones. And my metaphor for this, especially when Neptune and Saturn, like Saturn was coming closer and closer to Neptune in Pisces. And it was like, you got Neptune and then you got Saturn. The apt metaphor I found and the image that I offered often in consultation, where I was sitting so often with folks who were in this Neptune transit and felt lost in space, right? The coaching often is, don't steer the ship in the fog. No reason to white knuckle grip the wheel, trying to force a boat this way or that, because you can't see where you're going anyway. Release the wheel, have a little faith, and understand that this fog, this storm is going to steer this boat to the place where you need to be and when. And that, of course, is a very difficult thing, especially for those of us who like control, right? Most of us do. But then Saturn comes in and suddenly, crash, your boat's found land. And the right thing to do, of course, is to run off and kiss the beach, right? But that doesn't mean the work is done, because you're on some strange island. And where's your food and water coming from? Where's your shelter, right? Like, you got to do Saturn, you got to do the work. But like, we're coming out of the fog and now there's solid ground to stand upon again. So let me first just check in, Nadiya. I imagine you experience this with your students and clients in very similar ways. Did you share a similar poem to help them through?
Oh, that's a beautiful question. There is a lovely poem. It's an Inuit prayer. And I actually find myself thinking about it often. And I will tell you, every Halloween, I rewatch one of my favorite shows. It's called True Blood. It is a vampire show. However, I did come across this prayer in this vampire show, and let me see if I can find it.
Well, as you
Uh,
look, I'll just share. I remember
yes,
True
please
Blood,
do.
and there was this lovely piece of that, right? Which is that True Blood actually wasn't True Blood because these were these kind of compassionate vampires who were looking for a not human blood source that they could feed upon, right? So it was like the beyond blood in some senses. I haven't heard that name of that
Right.
show for
Isn't that
so long.
fascinating? It's called True Blood, but it's actually synthetic.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that interesting? And so it leads to all kinds of adventures and follies and things. That's a nice way to put it. I mean, it is a vampire show after all, on HBO, no less. But this is such a wonderful way to end this conversation with you. Thank you so much for asking me this. And I am going to read this incredible poem now. I will tell you, it is not unusual for me to think of it. And I just wanted to make sure to get the words right, but it is not unusual for me to think of this prayer, because I think it is one of these prayers that just reminds us of what really matters, and we can get very caught up in the shoulds, right? And I think a lot of this, when you're talking about Saturn and control, a lot of that comes down to what we should be manifesting. It is Saturn, after all,
Mm-hmm.
what we should be manifesting. But the truth is, the embodiment of our lives, of ourselves, of our spirit is perhaps one of the most powerful manifestations that we're going to have. Now, what do we do with it is what matters. And I think that this is what this prayer reminds me of. So let me say it. This is an Inuit prayer. I think over again my small adventures, my fears, those small ones that seemed so big, for all the vital things I had to get and to reach. And yet, there is only one great thing, the only thing, to live to see the great day that dawns and the light that fills the world.
Mm. So one of our great explorations in this course really dances to that drum beat, which what is the one thing that ever was, is, and will be? And how does the circle, or really the sphere, depict this heavenly form, what some of the ancient mystics called the goddess? All right, so one more thing. What is the new vision? Because now, after the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, some of us are getting Saturn-Neptune transits concurrently. I'm having some of those. But it will then be Saturn first and then Neptune. So when it was Neptune, then Saturn, for me, that was release the wheel, and here you come to the new land, and there's new work to do to find the new you. But with Saturn first and then Neptune, especially in Aries, this image has come through. It hasn't been tested. It hasn't been time. But it's this, which, and it's heavy, sorry, Saturn and Aries can feel in the tradition in fall, where you're alone in the desert. Step by step, you're just trying to make it to a place where you can quench your thirst before you fall and give in. And the heat of the sun is just too much, and you're done. And perhaps that sweet release for wherever you get to go next will come faster to you. But you're reinvigorated because distant, far away on the horizon, you see that shimmer of water. And so now you can step again, and step after step, you get closer and closer and closer. And sure enough, there is this oasis. Beautiful palm trees, the dates, right? The pristine pool from which you will drink. But here's the trick. Don't fall prey to the idea before you get there that that oasis is just a mirage. We're going to be asked to release the scar tissue of bitterness from the times in our life when we went to drink and found that this oasis was actually just a mirage, and we drank handfuls of sand, and of course that makes things worse. And the issue is we thought we got wise, right? So there's been so many times where I've sat with somebody, they're like, I figured it out and I'm not going to fall in love ever again because love is this and that. And you're like, whoa, that's heavy. Like, what did you used to know love was, and they tell you this beautiful poem, and you're like, that's, I think, the wise one, And I think there's something of an opportunity and a trial and initiation, personally, collectively, culturally, in the times that will come in the heels of this Saturn-Neptune conjunction, that reminds us to release what we think is wisdom, to reclaim the sweet secret of naivete that will let us grow from a whole new space.
Wow. I'm going to tell you something, and it might just surprise you, might blow your mind a little bit with that example that you gave. So, with my name, right, Nadiya, it has a few different meanings. So, one is um, hopeful, right? That's one way that it was understood in, especially in Eastern Europe. But the way that I was taught to understand the meaning of my name was when you are in a desert and you don't see anything except sand all around you, but way off in the distance, you can hear that there is an oasis. You don't see it yet, but you can hear it. That sound that you hear is what's called Nadiya. That's how I was raised to understand the meaning of my
Oh my
name.
gosh. I
And
wonder
so
if it
it's
sounds like Nadia.
yeah, yeah, and it's like the the guide to the path of hope has been one interpretation of what Nadiya means, but in a very
Mhm.
literal way, that sound is what's called Nadiya. So how incredible. Like, I got chills that you would choose that example at this moment to share, as I know for a lot of us, this conjunction of Saturn and Neptune, it is activating my chart in a very powerful way. And so it is conjunct my Athena and Black Moon Lilith. It is squaring my Venus. And so what a powerful, lovely gift you've given me by sharing this example. It has awakened something in me very meaningful. It happening in my 10th house, no less. So thank you for that, Gemini.
My
Thank you.
pleasure. And what a gift that you give us by leading by example and being that one who can show us back to the way of hope, which is a way, and we need it more than ever before when we look at the weirdness of the world. And it's a personal choice. So just to end there, and this kind of Aries, this reminder of the power of self, right? And choosing hope as a way of life despite it all, it will change the world.
Yeah, hope is one of the most powerful energies that exist, and it is an energy of love. I think that's part of what makes it so powerful. So, yeah, what a wonderful message to have at this point as we stand on the precipice of this really important reset, I think, for humanity with this Aries point, 0 degree activation of these huge planets. Let's co-create an incredible new beginning for all of us. Let's set that intention for ourselves now. And how wonderful to celebrate with it with you. Thank you again, Gemini, for being here. I'm so grateful for you. Thank you. And thank you to everybody out there for watching. Until we connect again, take care. Bye.